Hello everyone, Lorenzo here. So the premise of this guide is to help you have the best experience possible in sim racing on the iRacing platform. I'm going to be giving you tips which are going to be more focused on making sure that you have as much fun as possible when you start, but also especially in the long run, and enjoy the hobby and stay with us, and that you don't leave us because you get frustrated. And I absolutely love sim racing. For me, the most important thing is to have fun. And if you resonate with that mentality, then I highly advise that you stick around to see if maybe you can take away something from this video and enjoy the hobby as much as possible. Please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If I missed anything or if you don't agree with anything, just let me know in the comments, guys. Let's get right into it. Alright, let's get into chapter 1, practice. The reason why this is chapter 1 is because if you're new to iRacing, you might be new to sim racing. And if you're new to sim racing, you're gonna be spending a lot of your time at the beginning just practicing. The goal of practice at the beginning shouldn't be to be as fast as possible. I mean, ideally, obviously, you wanna be as fast as you can be in racing, right? But actually, I would say that at the beginning, the main goal of practice is to be consistent. The reason why that's important is because when you race, when you get to that point, you want to make sure that you stay in a race for as long as possible. And to do that, you want to make sure that you don't take yourself out or that you don't take other drivers out. I always say, if you're not consistent, you can't race. It's not recommended for your own experience, and it's not recommended for other people's experience either. Assuming that you're new to sim racing, there's a ton of videos out there, a lot of content teaching you driving technique. The thing is, I find that stuff to be quite overwhelming if you're brand new. You're gonna get absolutely showered with a ton of terms and theory which might fly over your head if you don't have a bit of experience already or a little bit of context already when it comes to driving. So honestly, at the very beginning, my advice is to just pick one of the rookie cars. So either the MX-5 if you like tin tops, or the Formula V if you like open wheel, and pick a track and just drive. Get a feeling for the steering, the throttle, the brake. Just try and feel how the car behaves. Turn your delta on and see in which corners you're gaining time and which corners you're losing time. You will see that each time that you see that bar turn green, that you will be gaining time on your previous lap, which means that you're improving. You're gonna feel so satisfied and it's gonna be great. Once you've accumulated a bit of experience like that, you have your own base time lap, you're maybe already improving a little bit on your own on that base time lap and you're fairly consistent. This is when I advise watching videos about driving technique, watching track guides and things like this that can teach you good habits. And one more thing, take breaks. Do not burn yourself out doing super long practice sessions. Do a few laps, then take a break. Don't do 50 laps in a row. Do 10 laps, take a break. You will see you will benefit more like this, because during the time that you're not practicing, while you're sleeping even, that's when your muscle memory consolidates. And that's when you realize, when you go to the practice session afterwards, that you're almost instantly able to be quicker because your brain processed all that information that you learned in the practice session before. Now, one final thing that needs to be mentioned about practice is that whilst practicing is extremely important, ineffective practice can turn into a huge waste of time. If you wanna see how I practice, and if you wanna learn my practice routine, which I perfected over time to try and make it as effective as possible, and also learn a lot more practice tips, make sure you check out my practice guide, which I'm gonna link up here. Alright, let's move on to the second chapter, safety. Obviously, nothing sucks more than being taken out during a race, especially if you have no fault in that. Now, Being a safe driver, I think, mainly comes with experience. You will need to get yourself in certain situations in order to understand when a crash is about to happen. You will have to learn to interpret the behavior of other drivers in order to understand whether or not they are likely to cause a crash. And these kinds of things you can only really learn by experience. But I've done almost 300 races on iRacing. I have some experience, and there are some tips that I can give you right now up front that might help you be a safer driver and avoid wrecks if you try and keep those things in mind during your races. Top tip, get yourself crew chief. The crew chief spotter will tell you when there are cars onto your right and onto your left, and it's also going to tell you how many there are. That's going to ensure that when you're driving side by side with another driver, that you hold your line and that you don't go barging into their line and take them out and take yourself out. Another tip that I have from experience is that when you start a race, I always try and hold the inside line for turn one. The reason why I do that is because I find that it makes it a lot less likely for cars to understeer or spin into your path. It usually means that you're gonna be able to keep your car pointing in the right direction, and so I highly recommend doing that. It's not always possible. If you have to hold the outside line during turn one, just make sure that you leave enough space to the guys that are running on the inside. When you're racing hard with another driver and you're following their car closely, make sure that you brake a little bit earlier than your pre-established braking points, to make sure that you do not rear end them, because that's gonna end up with both of you having a spin and the situation turning very sour. If you're heading into a packed corner, for example, like a turn one, or if you're maybe having like a 4 or 5 car battle and you're all heading into a heavy braking zone together, make sure that you brake early. That way you will prevent a massive multi-car accident from happening, very similarly to the other tip about following another car closely. Regarding netcode, it's a real thing on iRacing. If you want to make sure that it doesn't affect you, try and leave a little bit more space between yourself and another car when you're trying to overtake them or when you're attacking them. When you see a crash unfolding ahead of you, you might be tempted to keep your foot down on the gas full speed to try and get around it and also try and gain all the positions that the drivers involved in the crash are losing. Well, you might be tempted to doing that, and sometimes it might pay off, but I think it's even better to just slow down, assess the situation, see where there is a gap that you can drive through safely, and do that. Because yes, you might not gain as many positions, and maybe somebody behind you might overtake you, but you're ensuring that you're not gonna become the next victim of that crash. When you're approaching a heavy braking corner, make sure that you do not move under braking, especially if the car behind you is very close. Because if you do, you will almost certainly cause an incident. On that note, make sure that your intentions are as clear as possible. If you're gonna defend, take the inside line to the corner and hold it. Make it as clear as possible, mate, I am defending. I'm gonna hold the inside line. This pre-primes the driver behind you to take the outside line and prepares him to do so as well in a safe way. If you do things last second, if you're erratic, if you're unpredictable, likely to cause a crash. By following these tips, you should be able to minimize your accidents to those instances where you just basically get purely unlucky and there's nothing that you can do to avoid getting, for example, hit by someone else or getting involved in like a crash ahead of you. That will happen, and those situations you will have no control over, and that's just part of sim racing. But at least with those tips, you can try and control all the situations that you can actually control and avoid a crash. Alright, so the next thing I want to talk about is qualifying. The next thing that I want to talk about is qualifying. I have a very straightforward advice here for you. Qualify for your races. A lot of people say start from the pits or don't qualify so that you can start at the back, or you can start from the safety of your pit box and avoid all the carnage and all the nonsense in turn one. And okay, to one extent, I can understand that if your purpose is preserving your safety rating for whatever reason, or maybe you're just not in the mood to get involved in some turn one shenanigans or whatever. Okay, I get that. But to be fair, from a fun and also from a learning perspective, I would advise any day to qualify. I've never not qualified for a race. I don't regret it. You want to start right in the middle of the pack where it's challenging to get out alive at turn one, where it's challenging to make sure that you're aware of all the cars around you, because this is how you learn. And this is how you get more comfortable driving in a tight pack under pressure. The more you get comfortable in this environment, the more you will not be intimidated by it and you will perform better. Now, let's quickly move on to the next chapter, progression. A lot of people say get out of rookies as quickly as possible. There's literal guides here on YouTube on how to get out of rookies in the fewest amount of races possible. And to be fair, I quite disagree with this approach. Now, yes, the driving standards in rookies are obviously the lowest in the whole service, especially if you're in the bottom splits. But hear me out. There's a ton of things to be learned in rookies. Rookies is where you should be learning the bulk of your accident avoidance. It's where you're going to be learning the basics of your racecraft. Is where you're going to be, also racing alongside other beginner drivers and learning from each other by ending up in situations that are a little bit more unusual or a little bit more unpredictable. Also, mistakes tend to be more forgiven in rookies. So if you're still quite inconsistent, for example, or if you're still making a bunch of mistakes, if you're learning, rookies really is the place to be honest. When I started iRacing 2 years ago, I had zero experience in any racing games of any types. I spent 3 whole months in rookies. That's the length of one whole season, and I'm very, very glad that I did. So the next thing that I want to talk about is mentality. Mentality plays a huge, huge part on whether or not you're having a good experience when you're on iRacing or sim racing in general. I highly advise to keep in mind at all times that incidents with other cars will happen. Whether it's your fault, whether it's not, whether you can do something about it, or whether you can't, it's going to happen. Even if you're squeaky clean in your driving, you could be having the perfect race and then someone else makes a mistake and collects you and ruins it. Yes, I know, it's incredibly frustrating. You will get very, very, very frustrated. But knowing that something like this is very likely to happen, I highly advise you to be prepared. Take these things into account, take these contingencies into account, and be prepared to navigate them as calmly as possible when they do happen. It is important to take these incidents for what they are, which is basically kind of like a meaningless thing at the end of the day, and just move on. Do not immediately assume that it's somebody else's fault. Try and look at the replay and see what you could have done better. Try and learn so that you can avoid being in that situation again. Use these other elements of learning and of analysis to try and take a negative thing such as a crash and turn it into a positive thing such as a lesson learned. Apply that in future races, improve, and then you will see that you're gonna start crashing less anyway, or you will be involved in crashes less anyway. And when you do, you're just gonna be like, okay, whatever, moving on. That's where you wanna try and get on iRacing and in sim racing in general, in my opinion. Another thing, if you take yourself out or if somebody else takes you out and you end up all the way at the back of the pack, try and not give up. I know that in this case it is very tempting to forfeit the race because, the top 5, the podium, the win is super far gone and you probably won't even be able to get a top 10 anymore. But look, a lot of drivers make mistakes during the race and in the late stages of the race, so it's likely that after your incident, if you're clean, you can regain a lot of positions. There's races where I ended up all the way back down in like 17th, 18th, 19th position and managed to fight my way back, or to be lucky and regain my way back to 7th position, for example. And if I would have given up, I would have lost on all that I rating and safety rating. And that's also another thing. If you have an early crash and you end up all the way at the back of the pack, yes, maybe you will not gain much I rating anymore, but you can still gain a lot of safety rating by finishing the race cleanly from that point onwards. And this discussion about mentality feeds perfectly into the next chapter, which is about etiquette. I honestly think that etiquette is quite important in sim racing because we're all trying to have fun, but we're also all trying to perform well. And trolling and just bad or unsportsmanlike behavior is just something that's not really appreciated in sim racing. It's a little bit more serious than that, even though obviously it's a game. It's important to respect each other on track, both personally, obviously, but also in the way in which we race against each other. It is so much easier to have plenty of fun when you're sim racing, when there is a good and respectful vibe in the lobby. I highly recommend to bind the sorry and the thank you text lines in on your steering wheel. If you take somebody out by mistake, just quickly apologize by clicking on the sorry button on your steering wheel. If someone, for example, if a back marker lets you past easily, don't take that for granted. Say thank you. The reason why these things are important is because, first of all, if there is, for example, a tense situation like a crash, you take somebody out, by apologizing immediately, you diffuse the situation that the other guy understands, okay, he made a genuine mistake and it happens, I'll let it go. On the other hand, if you don't, it might come across like you did it on purpose, and then he might seek revenge, for example. Similarly, if you get taken out by another driver, do not immediately jump to conclusions during the race that it's their fault. I mean, maybe it is, and maybe you're entirely right, and you're allowed to be frustrated, but wait a moment. Just put it in one side of your brain, leave it there for now, finish the race, try and make the most out of the remainder of the race, and then after the race, look at the replay, assess, see what happened. Maybe you find out that it was your own fault or that it was a racing incident. And you will feel like a fool because you spent the entire race swearing at the guy or being super angry. And so, if you do end up taking somebody out, another thing that I would advise is to wait and give them the position back. Yes, it's going to suck because while you're waiting for the guy to rejoin the track, 10 other cars are gonna overtake you, but you're gonna feel a lot better about yourself. If you take somebody out with a dive bomb or with a late break and like rear-ending them, you ruin the race and you just take their position and you go on, sure, you will end up doing well, but are you gonna feel good about yourself at the end? I don't know. Some people don't care. Some people do. It's different for everyone, but in my experience, especially if you know when you take the guy out, if you know that it's your fault, I highly recommend apologizing and waiting for the guy to get back on track and then joining in behind them. But if somebody else takes you out, what can you do in order to make sure that you don't further end up ruining other people's races? If you need to rejoin the track, you must look at your relative box. Your relative box is going to tell you how far away other cars are from reaching you. So if you see that there's a big pack of cars only a couple seconds behind that's about to come right past, do not rejoin the track. You have to wait for a time window from the car behind, which allows you to rejoin the car safely without getting in their way and potentially obstructing and potentially causing them to crash into you and causing further damage. And they're right, we've covered a lot of bases, which I believe when you kind of take all these chapters, you merge them together and you try and execute all those little different things that I've talked about, I think it can overall lead to a very, very positive iRacing experience and sim racing experience. and help you stay on the service and stay with us in sim racing for a long time and really, really enjoying it while you're doing it. But there's one final thing that needs to be said, and that is have fun and make having fun your priority. Sim racing truly is a journey. It's such a steep and long learning curve, and if you're super focused on high rating, performance, speed, all this kind of stuff, it might just turn into a grind and it might just end up being not so fun anymore. Of course, if your background is like esports and if you're, a super professional quick guy, obviously this is probably not going to relate with you, but the truth is that most of us aren't like that. And that's why I'm recommending that to you. And even I'm quite a competitive guy, but I find it so important for myself to just, see it for what it is and to focus on having fun. Also, you do not have to win every race or be on the podium or in the top 5 every single time to have fun. In fact, what I find the key to having fun in sim racing is to set challenging but realistic goals when you're racing. So what I like to do when I get into a race is I look at the strength of field. I compare my I rating to the strength of field and to that of the other drivers. And that already gives me an idea whether I'm gonna be fighting at the front of the pack or at the back of the pack. And so at that point, I get an idea and I really kind of know, okay, in this race, I can fight for a podium, or in this race, I can fight for a top 10. I immediately put myself in that state of mind where I know what is realistic and what I can achieve, and I make that my goal. If I do better than that, then it's wonderful, it's a bonus. But if all that I achieve is a P10 in a race with 20 other cars where I am one of the lowest rated drivers, then that's also a win. That's also absolutely a win because you managed to defeat drivers that on paper are a lot better than you, and that's important. And finally, do not get attached to your I rating. It will come and it will go. It's a constant roller coaster. It's ups and downs. You'll have periods of peaking upwards. You'll have periods of being down in an I rating slump. It's part of the game. And again, when you go down, look forward to the next time that you can go up again. And when you're at the top, don't get attached to it. You will likely mostly just end up disappointing yourself. And with that, guys, I conclude my guide to having a much better experience on iRacing. Obviously, this is from my experience, from my perspective, and I know a lot of sim racers that I talk to can relate with a lot of the stuff that I said. But even if you take away 1 or 2 tips or 1 or 2 points from this video and you otherwise found it useful or entertaining, please consider leaving a like or consider subscribing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with. Let me know from your own experience if there's other things that you would add. And yeah, ultimately, I wish you all a wonderful sim racing journey. If you've just joined iRacing, make sure to not give up. You can do this. If you want to talk about sim racing, by the way, and you want to join a wonderful community of very chill sim racers, make sure that you join my Discord. The link is in the description. If you're maybe thinking of getting iRacing and you haven't, press the trigger just yet, make sure that you do so using my iRacing referral code. The link to that is in the description. In the description, you will also find the link to my Twitch, which is where I stream. Without further ado, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful week. Take care. Bye, guys.